I remember reading about blowjobs. Simultaneously exciting and horrifying.
Yeah.
I remember I had a little notebook. I would literally just like draw boobs on it and then be like, hey, yeah. Like, I'm so multi-orgasmic that it's like, am I gonna like faint if I come too many times?
Hi, my name is Bree Mills, and I am a porn director with a purpose. Now, throughout my career, I have covered just about every niche, and I've created some award-winning films and brands along the way. But now, I'm much more interested in getting to know the real people behind my characters. And that's because I believe adult entertainers can be some of the most powerful role models when it comes to sex ed, consent, empowerment, and wellness. By asking the right questions, our community can really help people better understand themselves. So that's the mission of this podcast. Let's get up close. All right, Siri, welcome to the podcast.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm good. I'm very excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, you're obviously one of Adult Time's ambassadors. We work with you a lot, so I'm super happy to be able to have you on this series and get a chance for everybody to get to know you a little bit better. We did, just for disclosure before this podcast, have to turn off all of our phones because especially mine was activating Siri as soon as we started talking. So we're all set now. I want you to tell me a fun fact about yourself.
I grew up doing martial arts, like karate.
Mm-hmm.
And we're talking about really far back when I was like a child. I quit when I was 16 because I was tired of having to tell my friends that I couldn't hang out with them because I have karate tonight. But I have brown belts in two different types of karate.
Nice.
But 0 black belts.
Now, where this is me being ignorant, but like, where does the brown belt rank in the color category of? Is it like directly under the black belt?
That's the easiest way to put it. Like it depends on the style of martial arts, but like brown is typically like really high up. In the two that I got a brown belt in, it was immediately below the black belt, and then the other it was like 2 steps below. There's like a brown and then a brown with a black stripe and then the black.
Nice. So basically, you could save any of us at any moment if we needed in you for self-defense.
I like to think that I could, but in all honesty, I haven't practiced since I was a teenager. So I'm like, I have no idea how much of this, like I know, I still remember some of my forms, like, cause you have to do like a form. It's like a memorized dance or like choreography that you have to do when you test for a belt. And I still remember some of them.
Well, I will remember that at the very least if we have any karate themed scenes. And I might actually now like just write a karate themed scene knowing that's something you have in your arsenal.
That would be so much fun.
All right. So, I would love to hear a little bit more. I know you've got a really interesting story and a really interesting journey within the adult industry. But before we kind of get into that, let's go way back. Tell us about your upbringing, kind of where you're from, what your roots are.
So my roots are in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I'm very much like a Midwestern Minnesotan girl. And I lived there I was born there and lived there until I was like 12. And then my family moved to Texas to like a very boring suburb. So I consider it's kind of like half and half. Like when people ask where I'm from, I'm like, well, kind of several places because Minnesota, where I grew up in Minneapolis, is very different culturally from like where I spent most of my adolescence. So I think I'm like a blend of both. I very much enjoyed my upbringing. I come from a family that's like very musical. My dad was an opera singer when I was a kid growing up. So that was a cool thing. That's like cool. Weird and unique. Like I grew up like going to watch my dad perform in operas like professionally.
And did you enjoy opera as a child?
I didn't get it, but I because usually operas are sung in a non-English language. Mm-hmm. So like that was a little weird, but I always enjoyed it when my dad was in it precisely just because I got to see him like dressed up in a goofy costume, and it was entertaining to me. Like there was one opera that he did and I don't remember what it was called, but people who are opera aficionados would probably know exactly from me describing this, but he played like a demon and he had to stand on stilts. So he was like 10 feet tall on stage. and the stilts were too tall for him to practice walking on them inside of our house. So he had to like walk down the street in the middle of the day wearing these giant stilts. So it was like there was some cool, weird stuff going on in my house when I was a kid. Because of that.
That's awesome. I mean, I asked because my father was also not an opera singer, but like a big opera fan. And so like every Saturday morning, as soon as it was like 6 a.m., the opera would be blasting. So my siblings and I grew up hating opera because it was just like always deafening in our house and we didn't get it. But now I appreciate it.
For me, it was like trying to fall asleep as a kid. Like I remember so many nights that it was like, it'd be like, you know, I don't know, whatever time I went to bed when I was a kid, like 9 p.m. or something, 8 p.m. probably. I don't have no recollection. But all I know is that I would be trying to fall asleep and I would hear my dad like banging away on the piano downstairs and like, oh, like just, but it didn't bother me. I just kind of thought it was funny.
So musical family, did it extend beyond your father's work? Were you know, did you have any siblings or any other members of your family also interested in music?
Yeah, my mom is very patently like non-musical. Like she makes fun of herself for like not being able, like she's like, I'm tone deaf. And I think she's a little too hard on herself. But like what my mom's really, and I think my parents bonded over this since like they're still together after all these years. But like I think one of the things they bonded on when they first met was their love of music. So even though my mom's not like a musician, she is an encyclopedia of like music trivia. Like, and it's like pop music, like anything that is like contemporary that like she would have grown up knowing. Like she can like name the artist of anything like within a second. But she also can do that with most classical music, which is pretty impressive. Like she knows like what makes Mozart sound different from like any other composer.
Nice. A good person to have on your trivia team.
Yeah. Actually, Trivial Pursuit is like a hobby in my family.
Yeah,
because of that. Like,
so you mentioned that you sort of spent childhood in Minnesota and then adolescence in Texas. Tell me about some of your earliest memories of sexuality and the sort of formation of your own sexuality. What are some of those earliest memories that you have?
I remember reading about blowjobs. And that, for me, reading about blowjobs, about putting a penis in my mouth, was like simultaneously exciting and horrifying to me.
Yeah.
And I think that stuck with me. Like, I guess the thing, I got this idea in my head that giving a blowjob was something that required so much skill that I just will like never in my life feel good at doing it. So I'm just going to avoid it. Like, so I was like so academic about how I read about sex that I freaked myself out away from ever wanting to do a lot of things. And
it's so funny that you mentioned that because I for a good number of years, I mean, obviously I grew up quite on the gay end of the spectrum, so I didn't ever want to give a blowjob, but I thought it involved bubble gum. Like I didn't understand. Like I was very confused. So I'm glad that you got to read that book because I was like, what do you need to blow? You know,
I still don't understand it seems like a misnomer. You know,
yeah.
But
when was the first time that you remember actually masturbating?
There was definitely a period of me not even attempting to like touch myself because I felt like dirty or like I was doing something bad.
Where do you feel that sense of shame came from?
I think it comes from like just the general cultural vibe that like sex is treated like something shameful or bad. You know, the fact that I moved to Texas right before I started 7th grade meant that I also never got any formal sex education in school because I had been growing up in the Minneapolis public school system and they do sex ed in 7th grade. And so since I moved right before that year, I didn't get it in Minneapolis. And then Texas just
nothing,
doesn't
right?
do it.
Yeah.
Fuck that state. If anyone's watching, like, I still have a lot of family in Texas, but fuck that state.
You should probably do some sex education.
Texas, do better. Jesus. Yeah. So which is honestly, all of that is part of why I just kept wanting to consume more and more information about this stuff. But yeah, I think that was a big part of it was like this idea that it's like so taboo that no one's allowed to talk about it openly. And so even though I was so curious, I felt like, I think I was afraid that there was something wrong with me, that I was interested in this.
Right. Especially like as a woman, right? Because there's a lot of pressure on, well, if you're as a woman feeling curious about sexuality, therefore you must be like a Jezebel type character or something like that.
I remember I had a little notebook, like one of those little like pocket note. It was like this big, like a little flip guy. That was just, it was unlined. It was blank. It was like a tiny sketchbook. And I would, when I was feeling like horny, I would pull it out and I would draw sort of like pornographic cartoons.
Amazing.
Like I would literally just like draw boobs on it and then be like, hey, yeah. Like, and like, I mean, I'm sure I have like a vague memory of at one point, like, because I kept it in like my underwear drawer, like tucked way back so no one could ever find it. And I remember like having one day where I was like, I'm so bad for doing this and like tearing it up and like throwing it away. Or I might have even like burned it so no one else could ever find it. But it was like, I still feel weird about calling it like shame because it never felt truly shameful about any of that. Like when I was in the act of like being horny and drawing these weird cartoons or like, you know, attempting to masturbate, even though I didn't really know how to pleasure myself very well yet. Like I never felt in the moment like this is bad or that I was guilty for doing it. I think I felt like I needed to judge myself because that's what you're supposed to do.
Right. This is sort of societal pressures.
I felt that it was like stigmatized, you know, and I understood that. But it didn't really, it also didn't really stop me from wanting to do it or from being curious, you know.
I have to just say as an anecdote, because I did just watch, we have a movie coming out with you for our Transfixed brand. And your character does draw a lot of sketches of boobs all throughout that. So, which was improv, everybody. So I'd like to think that you may still be doing pornographic cartoons all these years later. This is one of my favorite questions to ask because I find it fascinating. If you were to think of the first pop culture or like, you know, media representation of sexuality that when you close your eyes and you think about that first thing you saw when you were young that kind of made your eyes pop open, what would that be?
Once I walked in on my parents watching that movie Chocolat with like Johnny Depp. I don't even know how old I was. I remember like I think they had like friends over and they were all four of them were like watching it in the living room and I like wanted to get something off a toy shelf in the corner. I had to go in there and I just like, oh my God, they yelled at me. They were like, leave! Because it might have been during a sex scene and they were like, no! Which is just very funny to me now because I would not have known the difference. Like, I didn't know what the hell was going on. Like, nah.
I made the mistake of watching the movie Kids with my dad for the first time, which,
oh boy.
Speaking of walking in and watching sex scenes with your parents, that I would not recommend doing at any age with one's parent. But yeah, I always find that sort of interesting, like the first thing that flashes. So it was Chocolat with Johnny Depp, and it was a French actress whose name I can't recall. But yeah, that's a good one.
Just like bodies on screen. Yeah. Like I don't even remember. I still haven't watched that movie as an adult. I've never actually seen it. So I have no idea what, but there's clearly a sex scene in it. And I almost walked in and saw it and I was chased out of the room. So
there you go. They're further perpetuating that stigma of, realizing things that you should not do or see. What do you think are some of the biggest myths about female sexuality?
That women aren't visual. That's the one that drives me nuts because as I just said, like I was drawing porn photos for myself. Like clearly I buck that stereotype and I know so many women who do, but it's just this thing that is repeated forever and ever that like, oh no, women like to read erotica. Women don't watch porn. And it's just like, shut up. Like,
it's true. Well, it is true because some of the, I think about just like within our own audience space, some of the most hardcore tastes are from female audience members, right? But yeah, there's definitely that does exist out there. Tell me about how your sexuality evolved over time. So you mentioned, kind of part of your early journey was coming to the realization that you really did want to unpack your own sexuality. So how did that evolve over time?
Definitely a journey. I mean, I went from, so my earliest introduction to sexuality was, my own mission to understand as much as I could and like reading so much, I didn't even mention like, in addition to that, like, that like sex ed book that I got, I spent a lot of time, this is like early internet days, like early 2000s, and I was, my dad was also a programmer. So like I pretty much had like unfettered access to the internet. Now I know the people who are listening to this are probably like, oh no. And it's like, no, this was still like in an early enough time that like there weren't tube sites. Like I couldn't have found, I tried to look for porn on a couple occasions and like it was so hard to find that I was just like, what?
Yeah, or it would take forever to download one image or something.
Like I wasn't finding actual porn, but what I was finding were, there was like this website called bolt.com that was like for teens. And it was like a very early like iteration of a social media site. Mm-hmm. And a big feature on there was like message boards. And so there was like, you had to look really hard for it. There was like a very deep, like at like a deep level of like message board after message board, like in layers. There was one that like people would post erotica they'd written. And so that reading some of those, I remember like reading, there were like little queer, like they were just like little cute stories about like having sex with someone that you think is cute, like mm-hmm. that a teenager wrote. And I would read those, and that kind of started, that's the first time I remember kind of thinking of like that there are people who aren't straight that are women. Cause like I had been exposed to like gay men to some degree by way of my dad being in the opera. Like a lot of the other men that he sang with or performed with were openly gay men who were like married to other men and stuff, or like living with other men. So like that's something I observed or like understood to be normal at a young age, but I hadn't like ever seen like gay women, you know? So reading these like erotica stories, I was like, oh. And then I kind of like put it away. I kind of like shoved it under a rug, you know, because I think I found it interesting, but it didn't feel like that was me, despite also being teased about being a lumberjack lesbian in high school, which is very funny that I never like really questioned my own sexuality until much later.
Yeah, but you had other people that were questioning it on your behalf.
People would joke.
And did you dress like a lumberjack?
I wore flannel like every day.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I had very short hair and I wore flannel every day. And like,
did you play on the softball team or?
No, I didn't do sports in high school, but I was like, I definitely, I mean, I literally had like at one point, you know, the thing in the like 2005 that everyone thought was cool where you had like a pixie cut, but you styled into a faux hawk. When I see photos of myself from back then, I was like just so gay. You're just so gay. Like, of course. And it's so funny because I had never thought about my sexuality in that mm-hmm. way. But I also realize in retrospect that it's because there was no one I ever like really had a crush on. Like I was super celibate in high school. I didn't date anyone, men or women, like girls or boys. I didn't.
Why do you think that was?
I think part of it was because I had consumed so much information about sex and sexuality. It really was that I had this like academic mindset about it where I was like, I don't want to touch that stuff. I don't want to even really fully explore that stuff until I feel like I'm ready because, and I think it was fear-based too. It was like, I don't want to like have sex with someone for the first time and be bad at it. Like I realized that this is like a huge responsibility and like a thing, like I really blew it up in my mind as being a big, big, big deal. And then also it's like, you know, have ADHD when that comes with a big perfectionist streak. So some of it was just the like, I'm going to postpone this.
I need to make sure I need to be perfect. It needs to be, yeah. It was very intimidating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So basically I was like super like celibate all through high school. Like I didn't really, one guy asked me out on a date and it was the awkwardest time. He tried to kiss me and I was like, take me home. Like I just couldn't, it was too much, too fast. So I was just like this with everyone all that time. And then I finished high school. And then that was when I started to like be more comfortable with exploring. Like I had my first boyfriend. And then like I had this job where I worked at a bakery and the like manager of like operations was a very, very attractive queer woman. And I had a huge crush on her. And that was kind of the first time that I went, mm-hmm. okay, I'm actually not straight. I don't know what I am still, but I'm not straight. Mm-hmm. And then from there, it just kind of kept building. You know, yeah. I just kept very consciously making choices to like bring myself closer and closer to what I felt like would allow me to explore or like acknowledge whatever the hell my sexuality is. But it felt really important to do that, to explore it.
Well, like you said, it was sort of a running narrative all through your life, right? To understand sexuality, even if it was very intimidating, right? To kind of
Mhm.
try to academically master it.
I think the intimidating made it seem more important to me. I was
Mhm.
like, why would I be scared of this if it weren't something deeply important to me? Like,
Mhm.
and I still think that rings true. Like, I realize that not everyone's like that. Like, I have, lifelong like friends like that for them, it hasn't been this project of their life to like learn deeply about their own sexuality. It just doesn't hold that level of importance. Or maybe they just didn't have that many questions in the first place about it. Maybe it just like was what it was. And for me, it's never been that. Which is why it's like, yeah. And it's also a huge part of why I chose the career that I did.
Well, that was going to be my next question, because it's really interesting. It would be really interesting to hear about what led you into deciding to make sex work, your career. And was that all connected to that journey of better understanding?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Like super consciously connected to that. When I first got the idea that I wanted to do porn, it was when I was in my first year. I did like a gap year before college. So it was like in that year, right after I finished high school, that I was living and working in Austin, Texas, and making friends with all these cool people. And there were so many people that I was meeting that were like out and queer. And I immediately felt such a connection with those people in that community that I was like, this has been missing from my life. Like, how do I find more of this? And I was still kind of shy about it though. So I started spending more time in like online communities that had some level of like queer representation. Which is how, I met my first like girlfriend, which we dated long distance, which was really rough for a first like experience, and like a.
It does sound like a pretty typical lesbian relationship.
Yeah. She was very sweet though. She flew out to visit me more than once because I was saving up for college and had no money to go visit her. But she came to visit me and she was like my first orgasm. Like she would like, we'd have phone sex a lot and she like would like talk me through masturbating, which was amazing. Like to have someone like guide me through that in a way that was like, not just for the sake of like being, instructive, but it was like, she was like actively asking me like, how does that feel? Oh, try this then. Like it was really cool. Like,
it was the teacher you needed.
Yeah,
right?
it really was. Like, yeah. I wonder if there's a chance that she's actually watching this, and if so, like, thank you. But that also led me to watching like queer porn for the first time. We talked about this the other day.
Yeah. So what was tell us your first porn that you ever watched? Because I think that's an important brand to mention.
The first time I actively went out of my way to like consume porn and bought it was I found out about Crash Pad Series, which is a website that is still around. And
shout out to
Shine Louise Houston.
Yeah, Shine Louise Houston and Gisley, and amazing work there.
So I joined Crash Pad Series and was just like kind of obsessively like watching everything that they produced. And I found it to be like so unique, not the first time I had ever seen porn, but definitely for me at that time, it was the first time I had ever seen porn that felt like meaningful to me, that it resonated with me, that it was super hot and I was masturbating to it. But also I felt like, this is like, this is politically important. This was like 2008, like when the like no hate campaign was happening and like gay marriage wasn't legal yet in this country. So like it felt really, really important to be that someone was working on this.
Yeah, and that you felt representation within the adult content you were watching.
Yeah. And so for me that connected some dots in my head in terms of like, I'm interested in sexuality. I'm still currently exploring my own sexuality and figuring out what that means to me. And, I don't know exactly what it means still, but I do know that it's very, very important as like a personal value. And then also like I felt this, at that point, I've accepted that I'm a part of the queer community. Around that same time, I like came out to my family as back then I came out as a lesbian, and then sort of like over the years, it became like, I'm bisexual. Okay. Like now we're starting to figure things out more. But so like I'm a part of the queer community, and I think it just resonated so deeply with me to see that you could make porn that is meaningful to people, that provides representation that is really needed. And there's like a lot of power in that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's as soon as that clicked in my head, I was like, that's really what I want to do.
So tell us about, because you came into the industry for a time, right? And then you stepped away from it and came back. So maybe tell us a little bit about that. Going from seeing Crash Pad series and being very inspired by it to coming into mainstream porn. What lessons did you learn the first time around, and what did you apply for when you came back the second time around?
Yeah, there was so much that happened between me having that idea of doing porn and then actually getting into the industry. First of all, there was like 4 years between that, which is, I like kept going to college, like started like developing my interests as far as like academically and stuff. All the time still like exploring my own sexuality, realizing that I'm bisexual. And so by the time I actually was ready to move to LA and to pursue a career in porn, I had gotten further away from the idea of exclusively doing queer porn. I kind of had gotten the idea in my mind that what I wanted to do was pursue a career as a performer that has the most mainstream, like just have a mainstream career. The idea I had in my head was like, well, why can't I just go in and like kind of like snake on in there and like functionally maybe like pretend to be straight? but then like once I'm in, like once I have the rapport and I'm in the industry, then it's like, can't I just do whatever I want? Like, so that's kind of the intent that I had, which I think still kind of like, I kind of look back on that and I'm like, oh, you naive cutie. Like,
well, I mean, it ended up coming to fruition.
Well, it did, yes.
But maybe not in that initial round.
Correct. Yeah. Well, I mean, where things like kind of got off track was the fact that like my initial like getting into the porn industry was I was in a relationship that was not a good one. Mm-hmm. And that complicated a lot of things. So ultimately, I started my career in 2012 and was performing for 3 years and having a fantastic time and like loving all the work that I was doing. But just having in my personal life, having a absolutely not fantastic time in a relationship that was very like emotionally manipulative. So ultimately when I retired in like, I think I announced that I was retiring officially in early 2015, but in fact, I'd already like retired by that point. Mm-hmm. I think the last shoots that I did were like October 2014. Then I moved away from LA. But yeah, like I just had to get out of the relationship that I was in. And I kind of hit a massive reset button and was totally, completely out of the industry. Like I didn't have socials or anything. Like I wasn't like, I didn't have any way that I was monetizing content either. Yeah. I was like fully done. I was in civilian life. And then when I realized that I actually missed the industry a lot and wanted to come back, that was like mid 2019. And I just dipped a toe in by like making an OnlyFans account. But the second time around, I can say like, that makes all the difference is like not having the like burden of being in a relationship that's like stressing me out. Because I didn't realize, I think, when I was younger, how much that part of it was really holding me back.
Yeah. One of the things that I really want to use this podcast as a platform for is to share advice and experience that I think is really unique to the sex worker community, but that has a great benefit towards anybody, any adult, any like healthy sexual being. Mm-hmm. So how do you prioritize your own sort of sexual self-care and health and wellness these days? And what advice would you give to others?
I mean, for me, probably the biggest one, just as someone who's creating content regularly, is that I specifically make sure that I masturbate regularly. For background, like for anyone who's watching, and if you're not like a content creator of sexual content, like it's really easy to get into a mindset where it's like, oh, well, I can monetize that, so I may as well save it for like on camera. And like doing that with masturbation like fucked me up for a minute. Like when I first came out of retirement, I was filming so much solo content, which, partly because I just was like, oh, I gotta get my bag. But but pretty quickly I realized, like, wait, how long has it? It's been 2 months since I masturbated just for the pure enjoyment of it. And that made me real sad when I realized that. So at that point I decided, like no, that can't be the thing. Like I gotta masturbate. I gotta masturbate more often. Like, and like just for myself.
Yeah. Well, but that's something that I've always, because I've definitely experienced this as well. Like when sex is so much part of your life, but it's in this sort of strange, like context where we're always thinking about it, but we're thinking about how to monetize it. It does have an impact on what sex means as a private person, right?
It does.
And it can really be at the detriment of your sex life because it's all work or. So how did you have to make yourself a schedule? Like how did you force that separation so that you could still enjoy sex as a human being?
It's the most like disappointingly simple thing ever. I just like my favorite vibrator that I own, which is like a little cordless like wand thing. I simply just made sure that I always kept it charged and in the drawer on my nightstand.
Oh, that is a pro tip. Because there's nothing worse than reaching for the Hitachi and the batteries
and it's not
are dead.
charged.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. No, which is why I love, like, there are sex toy companies now that are starting to realize this. And I love it when a sex toy company has, like, made their, like, a charging base for a toy or whatever that, like, is cute to display. Because I'm like, I see you. Like, that's the thing. It's like, you gotta have it there. It needs to be charged. And again, as someone with ADHD, if the thing is cute and I can put it on display, then that's great because then I don't forget that I have it. Like,
yeah, exactly. All right, so prioritizing your sexual self-care by making sure that you masturbate regularly and keeping your toys fully charged at all times.
And also it doesn't need, here's something that I had to get over in my head because when I think of like me time or self-care, like sexual self-care, kind of what that conjures in my mind is like that I have to have this whole like beautiful ceremony about it, that it needs to be something that feels deeply indulgent. And like it can be that. It is great when it is that. But also for me, like a lot of my like me time, like masturbating is literally just like eking one out and then I fall asleep. And you know what? There's benefits to that.
Definitely.
And there's nothing wrong with that. So I'm like a big fan of like, I hate to like gender it sort of, but I do think that there's definitely like stereotypes with gender. Like I talked to my partner, and I hope he doesn't mind me saying this like publicly, whatever. I know he's said it publicly, so fine. I'm gonna put him on blast, but we'll talk. And he's sometimes just like to entertain myself. I'll be like, how many times have you masturbated today? Especially if I'm like out of town. And he's like, 4, like, because not everyone's like that, but he's one of those people that has the capacity to do that. And so for him, it can be a thing that's like, it's no less gratifying, but it can just be like, oh, I just want to come real quick.
Yeah,
like,
quickie, yeah. It's funny because that question I was doing our How Women and How Men Orgasm series, I was sort of expecting that same response where the guys would say, I do it multiple times a day. And with women, it would be much less frequent. But it was actually the opposite. Now, mind you, I'm talking to all performers, right?
Yeah.
So, but, almost every female performer I spoke to, not everyone, but a high percentage of them were saying, multiple times a day. And almost every guy was like, I don't got the time. Like if I have to save it for work, too. But it kind of goes to that vicious cycle of, what sex becomes when you're a sex worker, right? Where you got to always think about prioritizing for work. So.
Yeah. Oh, it's so common, especially my guy friends in the industry. It's like, even when we're talking about shooting content, and they'll say like, oh, well, I don't know if I should shoot content today because I have a scene tomorrow and I need to like not come. I got to save it up. And I'm like, sucks for you.
Yeah. Meanwhile, you just go back and you're rubbing one out at the same point.
Yeah. And I don't know if, I feel like it's much more common for women to be multi-orgasmic, but I've read that like there are women who just who aren't at all. And I don't know what it's like to be in someone else's body, but I'm so multi-orgasmic that it's like, sometimes I'm like, is this bad? Am I going to like faint if I come too many times in a row?
So what's your average number of orgasms per sesh?
If it's like in my personal life with my partner, because we're super like compatible sexually, I mean, my average with him is like 8 times probably. Like,
Good.
and each one is like topping the other one. So it really does, like, I will do, when I come really hard, I'll like his favorite story is that I like slap myself. Did not know that I did this. Like, literally I like lost control of a limb and that limb decided to just slap myself in my face. So it's kind of hilarious.
Randomly flailing arms.
Yeah.
What about when you're solo and you're masturbating? Are you someone that's a one and done or multiple times every time?
Oh, no,
it depends.
Multiple times. Sometimes it'll be like multiple times, probably at least like 4 times. And then I'll be like, all right, we're done. Come on. Like, we're good. We're good. Or I'll think that like I just can't handle anymore. Like my clit is just like, ah. And so I'll set down the vibrator. And then 3 minutes will go by and I'll be like,
You just got to let the waters calm down a little bit, right?
Yeah.
And then you go back. All right. So we talk a lot about consent, obviously, in all of our sets and the work that we do professionally. How have you brought that same sort of emphasis on consent within your own private life? And again, I think this is something that can be really valuable to educate viewers on how they can approach bringing consent into their own sex lives.
Not being afraid to talk about it in like just an honest and frank way. And I know for a lot of people, if you're not used to that, it can feel very awkward. It can feel sort of like forced, like, oh, like, let's carve out time to like have this talk. And I get that, because it's not really, especially growing up and, you know, anyone who grew up in a place like I did in Texas, it's like, talking openly about sex is just so taboo. It doesn't happen. Like, you don't get the proper education around it. So I get the sort of anxiety around that, or feeling foolish in some way for wanting to like have a, you know, like an outline discussion of sex before the sex is happening. But it doesn't need to be like, it doesn't need to feel like something that's that like measured, you know? I think a really fun kind of way to approach something like that is kind of making it a game. And I mean, like, literally you can get games that like one of my favorite games is, it's like a party like card game, but I think it's called We're Not Really Strangers. And there's several, I have a bunch of like little card games like that, that are meant to be played in like groups of friends or whatever. But there are some where it's meant to actually be played one-on-one or like in an intimate setting with someone that you're like romantic or sexual with. And I find those to be really fun ways to like start a discussion about sexual interests and eventually boundaries, you know? And it kind of takes the pressure off, because it could just be like a date night activity. Yeah, and then for sure. It can even turn into like foreplay before sex. But all along the way, you're like learning about your partner's interests and their boundaries. And when you have a prompt from like a silly card game, it takes the pressure off of you to feel like you're like pushing the discussion in a certain direction. Yeah.
No, that's actually fantastic advice. Those conversation starter decks, I know there are a bunch of them. And that is a really great suggestion for date night. So
I actually had one recently that really uncovered something interesting. And it was, so I was playing this game with my partner, and there was a question on the card that was like, this particular game has like a symbol in the corner if it's like a spicy or NSFW question. It had the symbol in there. So we know that it's supposed to be like a spicy question. And the card or the prompt said like, what's a text message you would really like to receive? And I was like, oh.
I'm thinking.
And, you know, I'm really open with my partner about like all my sexual interests. But immediately when I thought of that, what's a text message I would want to receive? I thought of the movie Secretary. Which is
probably the answer of a lot of people's like, what was the first media representation of sexuality?
I thought of the movie Secretary, and I thought about some of the scenes of that movie. And so I was about to like give my answer to this question prompt, but I started it by saying like, oh, well, you know the movie Secretary. And he goes, no, I've never seen it. And I was like, what? And I was like, we've been together for a while. And I was like, how have you never seen this movie? So the next night I made him watch it with me. And So it was just really kind of sweet that this like game had opened up this door to this other thing. And so now he's like watched Secretary and he loved it. And he was like, he actually told me like, I feel like I understand some more things about you because knowing that you like loved this movie. Like I saw that movie when I was like 15, you know, and loved it instantly. Yeah. And I'm not in for the record, I'm not in like a dominant submissive like lifestyle relationship at all by any means.
Yeah, that movie's just hot.
But that movie is hot as hell and it means a lot to me.
Yeah.
Like so sharing that with someone was fun. And it did lead to some fun, like, you know, sexual role play discussions or like some expanding of like discussing boundaries and interests. So it was just
Did you get the text message that you hoped for afterwards? Or are you still waiting for it?
I'm waiting for it.
Okay.
But I get it because I'm out of town right now. So it's like, you know, there's a lot of distance there.
There you go. So this series is sort of created in honor of Up Close, which is our newest studio at Adult Time that is taking on unscripted content. So content without a story, all sex focused. And we wanted to root all of our series in projects that really tried to celebrate authentic female sexuality and pleasure. Having shot a lot of different types of content over the years, maybe if you could share your thoughts on the importance of showcasing authentic female sexuality in content, like projects like what we're doing.
Oh, I mean, it's really hard to underestimate the importance. You know, one of the reasons that I love being an ambassador for Adult Time is because I see what you're working on and like the direction that you take with all of these projects. And I'm like, yes, so much yes, because it's needed and it's better now than it was when I first started out. And I know you know that too. Like we've talked about how much things have changed in the last like decade or so. But it's still, I mean, we're always going to need more of that. You know, I see it in like friendships that I have with, you know, other women my age and like hearing their struggles with dating and their sex lives. You know, I just see it in my fans DMing me, you know, and telling me like personal things about their dating relationships. And I think it's, you know, if as an industry, we're not acknowledging that, I don't want to, it's a little politically sensitive to say that our industry is responsible for educating people because that's not the point of us existing. We're an entertainment industry, but also I think it's a little bit naive to pretend that no one is trying to be inspired by watching porn, you know, to allow that to inspire their personal sex lives.
Yeah, we're definitely the default.
Yeah. So maybe we don't maybe need to say like, oh, we're here to educate because we're not, but like we can acknowledge that we are providing inspiration to people in some way and take that responsibility seriously and try to be the best source of inspiration that we can. And like, we're not doing that if we're not being honest about how women orgasm, how women like to have sex. Which isn't to say that women are a monolith, because obviously we're not, but like there's just been so much misrepresentation for so long that like there needs to be a lot more effort put into like being honest and accurate and like, you know, wait till you see how I masturbate, because it's probably not as interesting as a lot of people think, like, but it's real.
I love that is the best selling like sales pitch for your episode of How Women Orgasm, for sure. But I can say, having, you know, yesterday we were working together on another project for Up Close. And, you know, it was just a joy to see not only all of the female talent that we had on set that day, like clearly just having a really good time, but also all of your male counterparts that were also like, thank goodness, like I want to make sure she has a good time. And so it's nice when you kind of lift that veil of we have to, you know, pretend to be these characters or pretend to be these stereotypes and just like have a good time. That's quite refreshing, I'll say, as a director, you know. So
yeah.
So I'm very, very happy that you were part of that. We're obviously so happy that you're part of Adult Time, and I want to thank you for sitting down and chatting with me today. This could be like the part one of like a 10-part conversation.
I could go on forever.
Adult Time ambassador SIRI Dahl. Of course, we're going to have her on this podcast. I hope you enjoyed that convo as much as I did. I mean, I always love talking to SIRI. I could talk to her like forever. But today we got to talk about stuff that we don't normally get to talk about, which is all of her experience and what led her to being the incredible human being she is today. I think a few of my favorite highlights were that she was so academic about her approach to sex growing up that really informed her lifelong journey and exploration of her own sexuality. But while she was being staunchly academic, she was also drawing sort of boob cartoons and hiding them in her drawer. So amazing combo. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to give Siri some love, please follow her on all her links that we've got listed below. You can also support us and give us some love by liking this episode, by leaving a comment, by subscribing to our channel. In whatever way you want to support us, we appreciate it. We appreciate you. We'll see you next week. Thank you.